Okay, so I will start just very quickly while we wait for everyone to continue to join us. As I said, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, say who you are, where you're from, say hello. So welcome back to our inaugural speaker series on Trailblazers. We are Astronomy in Color. We are a group of women of color and Black women who are working to make astronomy a place where everybody can thrive, where it feels more inclusive and we all feel like we belong. For this speaker series, we wanted to hear from people who were inspiring to us, who are incredible scientists, and not just about their work, but also about what they've been doing to really make STEM more broadly a place where everybody can really grow and be part of it. You're interested in hearing from Trailblazers. So we wanted to hear about their research, but also to get advice on what we can do to follow in their footsteps. So we're very excited for our speaker today. We're grateful to Wipisa for sponsoring this series. I'll just first quickly introduce you to the facilitators for today's talk. We have Wanga Mlauzi, who's originally from Johannesburg in South Africa. She did her undergrad studies in astrophysics and physics at the University of Cape Town and her honors with the National Astrophysics Space Science Program, or NASP. She's worked on a lot of different projects in radio astronomy, instrumentation, and X-ray binaries, and now she's doing her master's at UCT, testing the standard cosmological model using rotational velocities of galaxies in the MIT field. And then we have Nicole Thomas, who's from Cape Town. She's a Sereo PhD candidate at the University of the Western Cape. She did her BSc honors and MSc at UCT and UWC respectively, and she was also doing this under NASP. Her current research is on cosmological simulations to understand the role of supermassive black holes and active galactic nuclei in the evolution of galaxies. She's the go-to AGN researcher for SIMBA simulations, for the SIMBA simulations group, which makes predictions for MIT and LaDuma, and these are Meerkat radio surveys. And finally, we have Sambatra Rajohnson, who's originally from Madagascar. She's currently in her second year of her PhD at the University of Cape Town. She did her undergraduate and MSc studies in her home country of Madagascar in astronomy. And now her research focuses on neutral hydrogen observations of the Vela supercluster and the search for galaxies behind the Milky Way plane. She's really passionate about science communication, public outreach, and empowering women into STEM fields. Okay, so I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Shazreen. Today we have the privilege of getting a talk from Professor Mmaki. And Professor Mmaki Jantjies holds a PhD in computer science from the University of Warwick in the UK and is an associate professor in information systems at the University of Western Cape. She has led 2 academic departments and sits on various local and international research committees. Prof Jantjies is a rated researcher and she teaches and conducts research largely focusing on technology in development. She has further conducted studies on the role of AI in education and also supervises research students on a range of topics focused on technology and inclusion. In 2017 and 2018, she was the South African representative to the W20 in the G20 focusing on digital inclusion. Prof Jantjies is also a member of the Equals Research Coalition and the South African Young Academy of Science. She has been a visiting research fellow at the University of Lancaster, at the Institute of Coding in the United Kingdom, the University of Warwick, also in the UK, and the teaching exchange staff at HNU in Germany. She founded a nonprofit organization that focuses on digital skills programs that introduces schools and teachers to computational skills. Prof Jantjies has been awarded several fundings towards her research projects and fellowships, such as the Aspen Fellowship that focuses on supporting science in development. She is also a mom and loves traveling with her little bunnies. I will now hand over to you, Prof Mmaki Jantjies.
Good afternoon. It is such a pleasure to be here in the midst of so much greatness. It was so good listening to all the profiles of the people who will be moderating this session. As mentioned, my name is Mmaki Jantjies. And thank you for the invite to be able to share on my journey and a bit about my research work that I do. So let me just share my screen. Don't worry, it's not going to be death by a PowerPoint. I'll try and make it a bit more exciting so that you can relate to what I'm talking about. Okay, so as introduced, I'm just going to share on the research work that I do and start off with my journey on how I got here. So when I was in high school, there was a school competition that was published in the local newspaper, and the competition was to write a letter and title it "If I Were King or Queen for a Day," and talk about what I would do. And there were no prizes attached to this competition. So my mother had cut out that newspaper competition and she brought it home and she's like, just give this a try. And, you know, I thought to myself, there's no prizes attached to it. You know, writing an essay or a letter takes a long time. Why would I want to put my energy into this? Anyway, I decided I'm going to put the pen to paper, and I wrote my thoughts on issues that I felt really affected South Africa at that time, and that if I was just given a chance for one day, I would really literally change them. Lo and behold, I got a call from the school principal to say that my particular essay had been picked, that I would represent the province. So I'm originally from the Northwest Province, from the city of Mmaki, which is the capital of the Northwest. And I was told that I would actually be representing my province in the whole country, and there'll be different representatives. They didn't tell us that part of the prize meant having lunch with Queen Elizabeth, as well as the late President Nelson Mandela. You can imagine what that did in my psyche. I realized at that time the power and the platform that we have with the little that we have to make a difference and to make changes. And so from that time, I knew that I didn't have to be someone special to be able to make my voice heard, but I could bring a societal change with what I had. And at that time, all I had was a pen and a paper. Anyway, in high school, I did physical science, and I was privileged to go to a high school where we had computational sciences. And so I started programming fairly at a young age. And I knew from a young age that I would go into the sciences field. And that's how I kind of fell in love with that. Chemistry is actually one of my favorite subjects, even though I never pursued a chemistry degree. But that's just the long and short of me and my passion for the field, and early on how I decided to get into the area. Now, as you may know, South Africa is a deeply unequal country, historically unequal, and the inequality runs deep in terms of access to education, access to good healthcare, access to many other amenities that the majority population of the country doesn't have. This was a picture from the Time magazine, where it pictured the reality of South African urban landscape, of how the inequality runs deep within a country. And so I've dedicated much of my life. My pet peeve was issues of inequality. And I think when I was young, my father nicknamed me Robin Hood, because he felt that I used to take whatever's in the house and share it with other people who are outside, to make sure that they got what we were able to get. But after finishing school, I realized that with the qualifications that I have a better platform, or a bigger platform, where something that I'm passionate about, I can actually use it. So I'm actually quite passionate about science communication as well. And so a lot of things that I do in my work, I always make sure that I communicate it to the public, because I feel that the power of science being communicated to the public also gives a greater appreciation to the public on what we do and how it affects them. And so much of my work, you'll see, I always try and reach out. It's something I've had to learn. I don't think it's innate to any academic to be able to reach out to public, but I continuously go to workshop. I continuously go to trainings that involve a lot of outreach. I also am quite deliberate about going to areas where I can influence policy, because I really believe that as a scientist, what I do should be able to get to spaces where I can have an impact in terms of policy on getting a large scale impact of what I do. So I've had to learn over the years on how to make sure that I move beyond just the lab, and finding spaces and going to spaces where policy and decisions can be made with a data-driven approach of what we find from a research perspective. And so in all the research areas of technology for development, my core research area has been in education. Because as I mentioned, with my own journey and with my own passions, I always felt that education has an opportunity to be an equalizer. With education, you empower people out of a cycle of poverty. One child being educated within a family can make a huge difference for people. And so I spent much of my years trying to understand what were the challenges that were making it extremely difficult for us to be producing enough graduates to break poverty cycles across the country. And within literature, poor internet access was a huge issue in schools, rural and remote areas. Science teaching, science resources in schools, textbooks, lack of science laboratories was also quite an issue. But something which was not always coming to the fore, which I realized is having a huge impact on the performance of children within our education system, was the issue of language. So South Africa has 11 official languages, and most of the South African children do not go to schools where they get a very good English foundation. Much of science and mathematics also relies on a good grasp and understanding of language. This is actually an area that Professor Mmaki Jantjies actually specializes in on multilingual mathematics education. And so, and also the lack of teachers' digital skills is something that I also found as time went on. And so I also realized that South Africa within research is a mobile first country, meaning that according to the Statistics SA survey results, we see that a young South African is more likely to have access to a mobile phone compared to a laptop as their first access point to digital resources. So looking at a sustainable development goal of ensuring that we break the poverty cycle and address issues of inequality, as mentioned for me, human capital development, developing people and ensuring that people are able to empower themselves. So teaching a person how to fish was quite important for me to say, here's a fishing rod, then how do we do that? And how do I do that with science? And as mentioned, I spent a lot of time looking at why was there declining performance in schools in key areas of STEM, where we need highly technical people within the country, doctors, engineers, computer scientists, scientists of different fields. What was leading to that performance? And I realized that contextual resources, teaching resources, learning resources were some of the major barriers within our education systems. And for me, my passion has always been, how do we attain the equal access to education goal using what we have? And what I have was my skill in technology. And so the relationship between education and development is so important because no country can achieve any equality without good education across board. And the reality is that we cannot separate the education from the lack of being able to find good jobs. So as we have a lot of open vacancies in key subject areas, but yet we're not able to produce the qualified high school children or graduates that can fill those roles. And so the issue of education is so important even from an economics perspective. So for me, I was always passionate about, as someone who has a skill in technology, as someone who's quite passionate about building and developing technology products, how do I leverage off technology as an enabler to make sure that a child sitting in a rural or remote area, a child sitting in a township can get access to good quality education now that I understood what were the challenges that were affecting our education and improving the performance of children within schools. How do we then leverage of technology? So I had these qualifications in the skill of technology, and I needed to understand from an education perspective, how do we come in and play a key role within that aspect? So much of my research has been on educational technology. I spend a lot of time understanding how do children learn? How can we make learning much more easier? What are the barriers that make learning, particularly mathematics and science, difficult for children to be able to perform well? And so looking at traditional learning, looking at game-based learning approaches, develop different learning applications, working and co-designing it both with teachers, both with the education department, and seeing how we can leverage of mobile technology. As mentioned earlier, a young child in South Africa and in Africa is more likely to have access to a mobile phone compared to a desktop device. And much of my research area was then understanding, now that we have an understanding of how learning occurs, how do we then develop technology that is very interactive, yet affordable, yet accessible to children within those areas? So co-designing has been quite an important aspect of what I do. And the reason why co-designing is important is because traditionally as scientists, we tend to get into a lab and research what we research. But sometimes when we get out into the field with the technology and the applications we've developed, they're not contextual to the needs of that society. They are unable to address the needs of the society. And so the aspect of co-designing has been very important, working with different schools, working with different education districts, to understanding the context in which that particular learning application that we develop is going to be used within the educational context that we find ourselves in. One of the applications that I had developed was a multilingual application that allowed young children to switch between English and the Setswana language, looking at mathematical content. This application, we had developed it for a school which did not have enough textbooks. It was the time when there was a textbook issue within the country, and they generally didn't have enough physical resources that they can use for mathematics learning. And building on the aspect of multilingual learning and the ability of a child to switch between languages to get a better understanding of learning and the content that is presented to them, I then sat down to develop an application called Mtuto. So Tuto translated to English is learning or education in Setswana, which was mobile tuto, which was mobile education or mobile learning within that aspect. And working with different schools across Gauteng, across the Northwest province, teachers were then able to contribute to the application and provide access to children within their schools to be able to use this application for class tests, for notes, for textbooks, and other class exercises that were critical to the learning content area that the teacher was actually looking at that time. Now, over the years, with advanced technology, my passion for education technology has not changed. I think education technology is my first love because I do work on software applications that are also used to enable access to healthcare, that are also used to enable access to small businesses. And so sometimes you'd read my papers on the application of technology in other areas, but I think I have to admit that in technology for development, education is really my first love there. And so what I've been recently working on is on a new technology that's called Immersive Technologies. Now, immersive technologies are can be clustered into virtual reality and augmented reality, as well as a mixed reality, which is kind of a combination of both. And these particular technologies allow you to be immersed into a virtual 3D enabled environment to achieve what you want to achieve. So I have been currently working on a collaborative project between the University of the Western Cape Chemistry Department, the AiC department, and we have been working with Sisanda Tech, trying to see how we can simulate chemistry experiments, looking at availing the content both in English and isiXhosa to enable first-year chemistry students to be able to visualize complex chemistry concepts with augmented reality using their mobile phones. So I think in the past year or two, the collaboration has been between the two. If you look at that picture, the picture that's in front of you, we were trying to simulate what you see on, I don't know if it's your left, and we were trying to simulate it on the right. And so we have been looking at different ways in which we can make chemistry much more engaging and fun, working with Sisanda Tech, but also bringing in an aspect of language to be able to bring isiXhosa in and make it accessible in languages that children can actually understand. Ultimately, our goal is to be able to simulate chemistry experiments, to then take the application to schools that do not have physical science and chemistry laboratories, to be able to use it and leverage off it during the science lessons within class. I don't know how my timing looks. I can blabber on and on, but I should be coming to the end of the first phase. And so that's part of my research work that I do. And so after many years of working within the field, something that became another pet peeve to me was that we were battling to find young women who got into the field of technology to register for the field. And I realized that many children are actually not exposed to the field of science at a young age. And many children come to university on their first year. They depend on that short time that they have within the school to decide on what they're going to register within the university. And so I founded a nonprofit organization that works with graduate students to be able to go to communities and teach children how to use computers in terms of programming and give them basic digital literacy skills. Then we advance to programming and ultimately robotics for them to use in high schools. Many of our programs are run in underprivileged rural and peri-urban schools. And so graduate students would go to those schools, be able to run what we call tech clubs. And each tech club is quite unique to the graduate students who's actually leading the program. But as time went on, I realized that there was a lot of animosity with the teachers in the schools because they felt that they were teaching a Gen Z, a generation of children who are much more advanced with technology skills than them. And so I worked on identifying schools that have computer labs that don't use those computer labs due to lack of skills, and started teacher training programs where we teach teachers how to use basic digital skills to integrate them into their everyday teaching. And my passion was to make sure that teachers stop seeing a computer lab as a computer lab for the computer teacher and realize that a history teacher can be able to use a computer, and in what way could they use really fun and interactive technologies on a twofold perspective of one, enjoying open educational resources, online resources that are there, but two, being able to avail the digital skill to young children to be able to walk away from high school with key digital skills that are important for their journey. One of the other programs that I also started working at the University of the Western Cape was that every year I would invite 100 girls from underprivileged schools onto campus and bring in leading women in technology from across the world. Adriana Marais, who is, I think you probably know her, one of the people who was chosen to go to Mars. Nadia Museji, who is an entrepreneur, but she's an engineer, and many other who I get access to. I then bring them onto campus and bring children from areas, rural and remote areas, to come and meet these women and spend a day having a conversation with them about a potential career in science and what it means to be in science. And over the years, I've had schools also begging that I should also send boy children to the 100 Girls campaign, because they felt that there was not even exposure even to the young boys. And so before COVID hit us, that is a project that every August we then do, having young women. There's one in one of the pictures there. Her name is Siwa Khudimo Matlapeng. She's a programmer at Facebook. And so it's often women who come from the same communities that these young girls would come from, sharing about what it means to be an astronomer, what it means to be a programmer, what it means to be a scientist within their respective fields. Oh my. Apologies. Oh, it seems like there was a bit of, I don't know if there's time, maybe I'll play this in the end. These are two of our previous graduates who were teaching on the Tech Clubs program. What they would do is that they do a vlog. So after every tech club that they ran, they would talk in the vlog about what they did, what the kids learned, and what they've learned as graduate students in terms of mentoring the next generation of scientists as well, coming in, and what they've learned, and how they feel they could better empower the children that they work with within the school. I think I will stop here. Thank you so much. And we can continue with the conversation. That is a bit about myself.
Thank you so much, Professor, for that talk. Would you like to move on to questions, or was there something that you prepared to maybe talk about your journey?
Yeah, I can go back to talking about my journey. I think, yeah. So
there's
anyway,
enough time, yeah.
There's enough time. Okay, because I was told that I should prepare something for first 30 minutes, and then from there we would have a discussion on the next 30 minutes. But anyway, I can continue talking about my journey. And so my journey started off in a really non-linear fashion, and this is probably something that I would share with anyone who's still progressing. That being non-linear and being unorthodox is also okay. So my first degree is actually in information systems, and my second major was accounting. And then following that, I then decided that I would go a bit into industry. Following my time in industry, I felt strongly that I wanted to pursue academia because I was quite passionate about research. I went and then I did my honors. So my first degree was with the Northwest University. I went on to do my honors degree, and I decided that I would be able to focus more on my research journey, and I was awarded a research scholarship to go abroad to do my master's at Oxford Brookes University. And during my master's, I was quite passionate about small and medium construction companies effectively using technology in their everyday processes. And so I developed an online procurement system that they can easily use and access through mobile phones to be able to make the procurement process much more easier. At that time, I was also working in industry while I was doing my studies. I also had just had my first child when I went to do my master's. And I had to take the tough decision of traveling with my son abroad, and I was with my husband as well, but it wasn't easy. Anybody who's lived in the UK will tell you that childcare in the UK is extremely expensive. And so immediately after finishing my master's, I went back to my first passion of education and pursued my PhD. So my master's was in computing. So I went back to the science field in my master's. And my PhD within the science faculty, I did a computer science PhD that focused on education technology. And during my PhD, I had 2 children. And so it wasn't easy at all, and funding wasn't always accessible. But I had to double up jobs to be able to cope with that journey. It was something that I was passionate about and I really wanted to pursue at that time. And I knew that also the sacrifices would be worth it, even for my own children. And so during my PhD journey, I had those difficult hardships. And towards the end, I actually reached out to the South African National Research Foundation and told them that I was having these challenges. And they said, no, apply for the scholarship abroad. At that time, they had a PhD scholarship abroad, which I don't think they have that right now. And the NRF was very generous in really helping me pay for that, which is something that I'm truly grateful for. And so completing, I was really passionate about research and went into academia full time. And following that, I had opportunities of leadership, which I took on at a very young age, I must admit. But I was always quite fortunate to have mentors who supported me with this, both male and female mentors who play such a key critical role. If you had asked me if I had planned to be in administration or head of department soon after finishing my PhD, I would have said no, never. I could never have done that. But the opportunity did come, and I took it. And there was something that I took away from leadership, I think both from the Northwest University as well as University of the Western Cape, was the power and importance of having mentors, being able to reach out to those mentors, was the power and importance of always be willing to learn and always be open to saying, I don't know. You'd be amazed at how people will be able to support you within that. The power of lifelong learning, to always be willing to learn on your own without anyone pursuing you. Actually, one of my, I'm thinking of actually doing another master's degree, without anyone actually following you up on that. It should be your own passion. And possibly another thing that I learned was working in a team, learning collegiality, that, you know, you don't have to like everybody that you're working with, but the importance of collegiality and never burn your bridges. Research and academia is such a small space. You will need those colleagues in research forums that you actually sit in. Another gem that I've learned through my journey is that be deliberate about your career path, be deliberate about your career journey, not necessarily to plan it to the T, because understanding that planning to the T doesn't always work. I didn't plan to have 2 kids during my PhD, but they did come, and I'm grateful for them. So the perspective is just always to be open to another route of life being opened for you. So your adaptability and your response to it, your ability to stand up and dust yourself off is quite important. But that only happens when you've created a network of people around you who can support you and who will be there for you. And always follow your passion. I know it sounds so cliche. Follow your passion. Your passion won't always look like what other people think you should be doing, but it is your passion. And that's what will sustain you at that time. And so if your passion within the science field is within a certain area to make a change, follow that passion. Everything that I do within my area of computational sciences has been about my passion, and I place it at the center of it. And that's why I could spend sleepless night on code, not working and trying to figure out what's wrong with that, because I knew the power of what I was doing and the application of that within the community. And so this is something that I've learned over the years, to trust my passion and be able to follow that based on what I've learned. But the power of networking can never be underrated. A lot of what I've achieved is because of the networks that I build with people, and the importance of understanding that we in South Africa, we have a term which is Ubuntu, and in my language is called Botu. We are because other people are. And being able to reach out to a network of people within industry, of people within research areas, research groups that I belong to, has been really powerful throughout my whole academic journey. And also working within corporate has also quite been powerful through my journey, maintaining Ubuntu, because I can reach out to people to say, I would like to do a research project here. Are you able to come in with your skills to contribute? I'd like to put this proposal through for funding. Would you be keen to be part of this passion that I know you potentially share, right? Equally with mentorship, I do reach out to people who I really admire, who I feel that, you know, and admire doesn't necessarily mean within my field. or within my area, or even with a degree. It can be people who don't have a degree, but there's something that they possess that I feel that I could be better positioned to doing if I learned from those people. And I think the final thing that I could say that I've learned over the years is also to be kind to yourself. I think as women, we tend to place so much on ourselves. And this is something that I learned in the first year when I was appointed as a head of department. I was fairly young. And I had placed so much pressure on myself. No one else was placing that pressure. And I wanted to maintain the excellence that I had throughout all my life. And I was working in a department with professors who were old enough to be my grandparents. And so I learned over the years that being kind to yourself is quite important, because you are your only judge. And the day you realize that you are your own judge, not saying people won't talk, not saying that the environment sometimes can be challenging to you, but learning that you are your only judge and you're in your own race, is quite important, and being able to be kind to yourself, because your mental well-being matters. So sometimes, when people read a profile of a person and you realize how many research groups, working groups they belong to, how many students they supervise, how many papers they publish, have they got children, have they got a family? That's if you decide to have a family and children. What they don't realize behind that is how much of that person has been given to the community, and no one will protect you but you protecting yourself. So I always believe that it's important to create an environment and a context where you are kind to yourself and you're able to protect yourself within that context, because your mental well-being, something which I'm really passionate about, is equally as important in making you successful. And the last thing, I know I said it was the last thing. The last thing is always be able to create the space to take time off. If you're anything like me, a workaholic, and your mind is always racing when you wake up in the morning, that this is an area that I should be in, this is who I should be collaborating with. And everybody in my circle who's my friend would know that they can get a random email to say, have you thought about this problem? And don't you think we can collaborate on this particular problem? And you could bring these skills and I could bring these skills, and we could get research funding to address this problem. And so be able to create a space where you're able to actually shut down from that and you protect your space and your peace in that. I think that's something that I've had to learn over the years. I'm still working towards that, to learn that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Professor. I really enjoyed your talk, as well as some of the very real and raw things that you said. I will now hand over to Nicole, who has some questions for you.
Thank you, Wanga, and thank you so much, Professor Jantjies, for that incredible and important, I feel, talk. I'm going to take this opportunity to first ask, though, with regards to your organization, where can we find more information and potentially become more involved with your organization?
I will put the website on the chat room, but you can, and I'll put my email address. You can email me as well if you're interested in contributing, because everybody who contributes is often on a voluntary basis. We have, it's people who are passionate about the same thing who contribute to it. So I'll put my email address on that. And if you feel there's a way that you can contribute, I'll be very happy to direct you in the right place for that.
That would be good. Thank you so much. So with registration for the series, we asked some of the registrars to ask some questions. I do have a few here. Some of these you've already touched on already, but I'll try to get into them anyway. Firstly, you have such an incredible history and journey. And one of the more common questions we've gotten, and what seems to be a common problem amongst a lot of women in STEM and STEM-related fields, is the issue of imposter syndrome. And you said already, be kind to yourself, it's very important. What other insights or advice perhaps do you have on handling imposter syndrome?
Look, imposter syndrome is a reality. First thing, you need to acknowledge that you do have imposter syndrome, because it's no use, not acknowledging it. I remember getting my PhD So when I did my PhD, I did a public defense. And so I had to verbally defend it. And I remember after the public defense and getting feedback, I kept on feeling like, is someone going to suss me out? Did I make a mistake? And with a lot of things, I remember when I was first appointed head of department, I was like, there could be something wrong. Do they even know what they're doing? A 28-year-old leading a department, I'm not really sure that's a good idea. And so I've learned to create a network of positive people around me, because I call a friend, and I think the biggest friend is my mom, who's like, hey, you don't know yourself. Let me remind you who you are. So create a network of positive people who you speak positivity into each other, because you're kind of the sum of the people you spend your time with. And so I spend a lot of time around people who emit positive energy, because I love emitting positive energy onto other people's lives. I also listen to a lot of content that deals with positivity and being able to kind of believe in yourself and what you're doing, because at some point in your life, you won't always have a friend to call on. It really needs to come from you. And so acknowledge that challenge is there, and be deliberate about looking for content that will help you, and circles of people and that will help you. And if it is on a chronic basis, be open to getting help. I think that's so important. If you realize that this really does need a professional, be open to doing that. I think stigmatizing mental health is something that I'm not big in. Anyway, I was blessed to be raised by a parent who was very conscious about mental health. And so every time she would feel like, do you think this is something that needs professional help? And I'm like, no, it's not something that needs professional help. So my mom was quite big on being conscious about mental well-being. And so I strongly believe if you feel something really bothers you beyond your point of control, it's important to just get help.
Thank you. I love your idea of sharing that positivity, because just listening to you now, and I'm sure I speak for others in the talk, that I can even feel your positive energy, and that makes me very happy. And you mentioned earlier about having supervisors that you had good relationships with, and I think I agree that's very important. But what advice would you give researchers or supervisors or PIs? What can they do to help their students, undergraduates or postgraduates, to make them feel like they matter, that their research is actually beneficial, and like they have a place, say, in the department?
Well, it's not all research fields that can be applied as mine, especially within science. Sometimes you're not necessarily doing applied sciences. I think for principal PIs, I think for me, I always remember my time as a student. I remember all the supervisors who I felt were not good. And I promised myself that I will not be that person to my students. We all have different characteristics. We all have our strengths. We all have our weaknesses. And I think when you're a principal investigator, it's very, very important to know what your weaknesses are and try to work towards them. Some PIs are good communicators and some are not. And asking feedback from your students is always so important to find out what can you improve with the next student that you have. Also, attending workshops for supervision. There's always an assumption that when you have a PhD, you will be a good supervisor. That's not always the case. And I think it's very important to be able to admit that you may be a professor or prolific in your research area, but it doesn't necessarily mean that your human interaction skills are literally the best. And I personally always work towards attending workshops for supervision. And I always seek feedback from my students once they've graduated and completed, because obviously our relationship often changes there, and they're much more relaxed and they're like, hey, but sometimes you're off the rails there. And so it would be great to hear from them, because now they know that now I'm no longer their supervisors. They can be pretty honest about, oh, you were so strict on this, you were so strict on that. So it's always quite important for me to get feedback from my students, even when I'm teaching, whether it's a master's, undergraduate, whatever program I teach. I'm always quite open to that. And I think being open to criticism, constructive, not your shoes were not nice that day you were teaching, you could have worn a better shirt, not that. But open and constructive criticism is so important, because I don't think there's any leader who can be good in their space if they're not open to criticism, constructive criticism, and trying to work towards that. From a student perspective, be deliberate about the supervisor you have. If I did not have the supervisor I had for my PhD, there's no way I could have taken 4 years with 2 babies and finished a PhD in computer science. Absolutely not. The amount of time I spent coding, the amount of time I spent on literature, reading, traveling, just living the crazy life that I did. I had enough going on in my personal life. I did not need, that from a supervisor perspective. And so sometimes an institution or a university you want to go do your studies in can be extremely good, but the supervisor may not necessarily have very good communication skills. And I think you need to be honest about yourself on the type of character you are and to what extent you can handle certain challenges. And so be deliberate about the human being that you want to be interacting with. Go and meet the person. I had an interview with my supervisor before I went, and I had a lot of interactions with him, just talking about stuff that has nothing to do with the research. And I pretty much figured out, because I had a couple of offers at that time, and deciding on the context that I would be studying in at that time, the city I would be living in, the person that would be my supervisor. And there are a lot of prolific people within my area that he was supervising me in computer sciences, but I chose him, because of the character and the people. I visited the research lab as well, spent some time in the research lab, read up on all the work that all the other students were doing, wanted to see whether it aligns with what I was doing, because all those students who went from that computer science lab are now my collaborators. We actually have a WhatsApp group of all the students that he supervised before. And we do quite a lot of work together, whether it is exchange, guest lecturing, whether it is research projects, we do it together. So I think it's so critical, especially with your PhD, because you spend so long, you can spend longer than 4 years on it. And so the person needs to be a person that you are able to get along with. And I think be open to, if you have a supervisor and you have challenges, be open to having a civil conversation with them. I think students need to understand that supervisors are also human. And they've got their own shortcomings, and we understand our own shortcomings. And so a civil conversation is always important as to what challenges they are and why you feel these are challenges and they can be improved within the relationship. So that's something that I would advise, that don't sit with your challenges, be open to it. Worst case scenario, then look for an arbitrator. But in a normal circumstances, always be open about the challenges you face with your supervisor. They too are human. And they appreciate the honesty. I think for me, I appreciate the honesty and openness from my students.
Thank you. And then just one final question, and I think this alludes more closely to what you were talking about during your presentation, and from a very South African context. I mean, I can say when I do say outreach, I have to keep in mind that a significant fraction of my audience has, as you say, never worked or used or owned a laptop, let alone care about galaxies or supermassive black holes. So one of the questions we have is, what in your opinion is one of the most effective methods that we can bring to excite girls and girls from underprivileged communities into STEM or STEM related careers?
I feel passionate about storytelling. Storytelling, which is contextual, is quite powerful. If I sit and tell you about computational sciences, artificial intelligence, and its ability to bring this, to bring that, all that is a whole lot of jargon, mumbo jumbo, which only me and other computer scientists actually understand. But if I say to you, education has a problem, and how do we address these issues in education? And the fact that a technology application can use that, I've practically told you about the power of artificial intelligence and its ability to address societal issues. But if I started it the other way around, you wouldn't realize the fact that, hang on, this can actually make a difference. So I believe in the power of storytelling and being able to contextualize the story to that context. In the 100 girls campaign program that I run, normally when we bring the girls to school, and the first thing we do is ask them, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And what they would say is a police officer, a nurse, a traffic officer, because that's what they see in their community, right? And so they do not learn anything about the Meerkat project. They don't learn anything about astronomy, black holes. They don't know anything about Mars or anything related to that. How do you bring it closer to them to say, if you look at the night sky and it's dark in your beautiful area, how do you tell a story in the context that they understand to help them be able to link up to what you were doing? I'll give you a simple example. When I did my research project, my PhD project, and I had to explain it to my mom, all she could say to me is, so you want children to learn in Bantu languages when all these years we fought for Bantu education to be eradicated, and you now want people to learn in their languages when we need to be learning English. And I was like, that's not what I do. Anyway, so I had to sit down and explain that, okay, this is the case. Children should be able to have an option to also learn in their language. Not that they won't learn in English, they will learn in English, but let them have an option to switch and at any point to learn in their language. And had to explain to her why that was important and how it's affecting science and mathematics marks. So in her context, that's the example that I had to use. So I found that storytelling, contextualizing storytelling for different contexts that we work in is good for outreach. And something that I want to advise that I didn't talk about earlier, be careful of burnout in outreach. There's some people who are extremely, extremely passionate about outreach. Always protect yourself from burnout, because outreach should not necessarily be only for the person who's passionate about it within a science department. It should be for everyone. And so sometimes what you tend to find, especially when you're coming in as a young researcher, you can be the one who's extremely passionate and you're holding all the outreach and other people are not doing it. Always ensure that you do outreach to a point that you don't really hinder your research, because you are a researcher and you want people to know, or you want to do outreach, but at the same time, we need you as a prolific researcher to see the prolific work that you're also doing.
Thank you so much. We do have some questions from the chat, so I'm just going to hand over to Sambatra to go through those. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you so much, Prof Mmaki, for this awesome and wonderful talk. I was really motivated, inspired from that. I think everyone in the audience also feel the same, and especially I really like when you say be kind to yourself, and especially you do not need to be special to accomplish something big. So we have here some questions that our audience have asked in the chat. We have, for example, one from Amish saying, a similar question posed to a speaker a few weeks ago. How would you recommend navigating a career in research or academia with a partner who is in a different or unrelated industry?
That's very interesting. So for those who do have partners or those who do decide to get married, I think I was blessed to have a partner who is in the research area. I think always sharing and giving an understanding, because I think the complexity is when somebody doesn't understand what you do, and when something seems like a pie in the sky, or somebody doesn't understand the impact of what you do within society. I think it's quite important, and always be able to share what it involves. There's a lot of travel to conferences. But what I do is sometimes also align the travel with my partner so that he can also benefit from the travels. So if I'm booked a hotel as part of my conference, I then use part of my salary to upgrade the room to a 2-bedroom so that they can join me on it. And then, for example, maybe he'd pay for his own flight or something like that. So find spaces where they can actually benefit from this field, because if you publish a lot and a lot of your research, you get it out there, you'll be doing a lot of traveling and spending a lot of time in the lab. And if they don't understand what you're doing in the lab, sometimes they have an animosity and resentment towards it. So I think communicating to your partner why the fact that you're passionate about it and what you do and the impact of it beyond just the lab, I think it's always quite important.
Okay, thank you for that advice. We also have a second question from Kilebokile Bonokwande. Thank you for the amazing talk. What advice or encouragement would you give to learners to continue to study when they see such a huge unemployment rate amongst graduates in South Africa?
I don't think you can get over educated or overqualified. Believe it or not, at many points in my life, I was told that I'm going to be overqualified and overeducated, and I'm working my way out of employment. From the day I passed my defense to this day, I had multiple offers where they had to just align with my own career path and career journey. I think what's critical is choosing an area which the country needs. That's the advice that I would give to young children. And I think something that we don't do very well in schools, and this is it formed part of I think the African the bank, African Development Bank or something, which said that our biggest challenge in Africa is that we don't teach children in the areas where we need people in. So I think that alignment between what we need as a country and what we give in terms of education is quite important. All areas are quite important, but definitely there are scarce skills that we have a high shortage of skills within that. And that this is one of the reasons of my passion, because I realized that many children don't know many of these areas until they get to university. And by the time they get to university, they've registered into areas that were always immediately apparent to them, and they didn't know about them until they got to that point. And so the power of making young children know and learn about all these opportunities that are there for them right before they choose their subject areas that will take them to the final year of high school is so important. This avoids children only having to take a decision in the first year on which subject areas that they want to focus on.
All right, so also apart from questions, we also have some comments from our audience. For example, from Lepakang Fuwane, who said, "As for trusting your patient, I love it so much. Thank you so much." We also have one from Peter Mali. "Thank you so much for such an inspiring talk. This was very insightful and I've taken away some important things." And we have a question from Brandon Engelbrecht saying, "Thank you very much for the talk. It really touched me coming from an outreach POV, as this is something close to my heart. My question is, getting started on outreach initiatives, how did you just do it and overcome the fear of it not working out in the beginning?"
So when I started outreach, I started really small. And at that time, I was just wanting to make a difference in ensuring that young children get exposed to programming and robotics at a young age. And so I chose just one school, and I went to that one school and created a relationship with that one school. And the advice that I would give is that outreach doesn't mean 1,000, 2,000 children. I'm able to impact all these many children today, or the communities and the societies, because it's been years of doing it. But you just going to a school during assembly and talking about what career you're in and what it involves, that is outreach. You just going to one science class or a non-science class in a school and having a conversation about what you're doing is outreach. You writing an op-ed, so an opinion piece about your research, in a platform such as The Conversation or the local newspaper about what you found in your research, that is outreach. So outreach is not going to win a Nobel Peace Prize. It is getting out there and getting your work or getting science in the community in the best way that is possible for you, your context, and your community. And I think also lifelong learning, going to seminars and sessions of science communication and also outreach is quite important because it helps you to be able to do that. And I think knowing your skills on what you can do best, do that. If it means creating a YouTube video that explains what you do for a high school child, that is outreach. And so I would advise that really start small. And once you've got the hang of it, and once you've created a network as well of other people who do outreach as well, you get to collaborate a lot, and it becomes much more easier. For example, I have a colleague who does chemistry outreach in schools, And we tend to work in the same schools where I would be doing technology outreach and she'd be doing chemistry outreach, and the impact would be much bigger in one school that we work in. So start small. It doesn't have to be anything big. It will make an impact.
Thank you so much. So as we've headed into almost 4 p.m. now, so I will just ask one last question from Rita. I've noticed that the difference in education leaves a mark despite efforts to bridge the gaps. It can be academic or confidence-related issues. As students or professors, how could we make the environment more welcoming for people coming from such situations? Thank you for the great presentation.
Thank you so much. This is such an interesting question. And I think I'll talk about my own personal experience is that I normally do a survey at the beginning of each program that I lecture, particularly for the undergraduate students, because it's the first time that they've actually walked into your university. And in the survey, I ask basic things like, how did you get to campus? Tell me about who you are, to give me a better context on who are the different people that are sitting within my classroom context. I remember there was a student who always got late into my class. And one day within class, I said to them, you know, guys, I'm really contemplating on taking a train to work, right? And they're like, don't even dare try. And this particular child raised her hand and she's like, let me tell you my experience of coming to class and using a train. And she just shared the story for me, right? And it contextualized to me what she goes through on a daily basis, just trying to come to campus. And I said to her, look, thank you for sharing that to me. I'll change the time of class so that we don't have to be this early for you to be able to come. So I found that doing those interactive surveys to try and understand my students better helped me to understand the context in which they're coming from, to be able to understand what are the challenges that they'll face within that. And also being able to reach out to the students is quite important, to be able to create that cultural context that they will feel better at home with. I also make sure that in the assessments that I use, I try to use contextual places that they know, contextual names. So in a question paper, I would use the local area. I may not necessarily be from that local area, but the local area, local names, local spaces that they would know in being able to answer the question, to try and make the content and the course as familiar as possible to them. And so I try to create that sort of space within the learning classroom context.
Thank you so much. So again, I would like to thank you for this wonderful talk. So now I'm going to hand over to Shazarine.
Great, thanks, Sambatra. And thank you so much, Professor Mmaki Jantjies. It was an incredible talk. I can't even recount all of the great advice, but mostly the inspiration for what you've been doing, not only to transform STEM, but I can see that it will really transform the country. You're starting right where we need it for the young people. I have a little one, and just hearing about your programs and what they'll be able to do, you know, holding just their phone and being able to use that to do science and to learn. I think that's incredible. And it's exactly what you were saying. We need that in the country. We need to identify those spaces where we need to develop in order to make the country great. So I can see that it's not even just going to change astronomy or the sciences, but actually South Africa and maybe even the world. And it's just, it makes me so, so excited. And your incredible journey, as I said, like, I cannot believe that you did so much, like with a family and PhD and becoming department head. I mean, we're so afraid even just to take up lectureship positions, never mind to like be the head of the department. You're an amazing, amazing example for us. And we're so, so glad that you could join us and give us this time to give us a talk. Thank you so much for the incredible advice and for being an incredible trailblazer. Thank you. And everybody, please switch on your videos so that
Thank you so much for the invite. I really appreciate it. Oh, thank you so much. It's great to see people.
I know, it's so hard with Zoom to not see the people and have that interaction. If I could work it fast enough, I could get them to talk, but I can't make it. I'll take some screenshots so that at least you have some record of the people's faces who are joining. But thank you, thank you,
Excellent.
thank you. I mean, really, really incredible.
Thank
It's really
you.
inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you so much. One of my daughters was listening, so here goes being a mommy.
That's wonderful.
So thank you to all of you and for the invitation. I think this is such a great initiative that you're doing, and I will definitely be following. Really, oh, I see some of my faves here. Really, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everybody for joining us all over the world. It was lovely to see you again. We'll see you for the next talk, which will be Professor Samaya Nisanka in a couple of weeks, but I'll send an email about that. And we'll be uploading the videos also to our YouTube channel, and I'll send an email about that too. But thank you so much everybody for joining us. Thank you. Bye, and thank you for the lovely talk. Bye.
Thank you once again. Bye.
Bye.